So I want to officially welcome all of you to, this is our second of our Bridge Talks, and we're going to be talking about finding motivation from within. And before I pass you over to Duncan, who's got an amazing story to tell us about how we're able to find that determination and strength going forward, I wanted to just introduce you, just to open up your mind to the concept of what is change. So what is change when we're dealing with employee engagement, change in ourselves, but really how do we embrace change? Now, we've done a lot of work with a very large hotel over the last 8 months, taking an entire population of 600 people from a very well-respected brand, a brand that they truly loved and were very loyal to. And this journey that we've been taking them on over the last 8 months, we've learned so much from them by watching them, how they embrace change. You know, as consultants, we can kind of roll on in with all of our ideas. But actually, it was about the Bridge team stepping back and watching the way in which people engage with change. Now, after speaking with Duncan the other day, this kind of began to highlight in my head about some of the pieces of work that we have done. It's really about how we begin to understand that when we find ourselves immersed in change, you know, how do we begin to even function? And now I remember, if I had days with you, I could tell you many of my mom's stories, because I have quite a few. I am a mama's boy, proud of it, and I often use a lot of references to my mom in a lot of my talks. But I do remember one thing that she did tell me, that when you talk to yourself, you're crazy. Have you ever heard that before? Who here has heard that sometimes if you talk to yourself, you're crazy? Yeah, it's a very well-known idea. Well, and that's just something that I was told when I was very young. However, then I began to think about that over the last 8 months and about how we embrace change. And then I mentioned that to somebody, and one day they said to me, no, it's whether you answer yourself, that makes you crazy. And I began to think about that even a little bit deeper. And no, I don't think that makes you crazy either. When you actually are a little bit not with it, it's when you stop listening to yourself. We all have voices in our head. The voices in our head is basically our brain's way of communicating with us. So when I begin to look at this team of 600 people going through this massive period of change in their lives, going from what many believed was the best brand in the world and changing that brand image for them into a new fashion luxury hotel. Now, for some people, they embraced it like that. It was probably the place they've always wanted to be. But most of them, it took time. And actually, one of the really interesting things happened last week. The hotel is based in America, and I was there last week. And I got to know pretty much all 600 people in the hotel, and I could probably name 80% of them by name. And this one person who works behind the front desk, in one of our final group sessions, she said to me and the group very openly, how only recently she began to experience it was okay in this culture that we were in. And I found it really interesting because I spotted her many, many months ago being quite miserable. She really rejected change on every opportunity she could get, both visibly, it was clearly written on her face, but also from the way in which she engaged with us and others around people who are already on board. And it was fascinating to hear this girl, after 8 months, say, I finally feel it's okay. It's like something had clocked in instantly, and all of a sudden it all made sense. 8 months we spent there, and she was one that I had put on my radar as to say, when she changes, I know it's going to be okay. And it was wonderful to hear her say it. It was almost like somebody had paid her just to make me happy. But it's basically how we embrace change. And often the way I began to look at change was we have to begin to understand that the one thing that we all share is the same timeline. We all have a past, a present, and a future. And when I begin to focus on the present doesn't really even exist in our world. It's like a pinprick in time. Because really what's always happening in the now is I'm just simply pivoting the past and the future and my perspective on them. Because the now doesn't really exist. because the second that I focus on the now, it's already become the past. So it's like this roller coaster that people are constantly on. And it's understanding that training and employee engagement are two very different things in our organization. Because employee engagement and motivation takes time. It takes time for us to get everybody on board, but it never should be confused with training. Training can be an element of engagement, but engagement is about taking people on a journey that allows them to connect at varying points with various things that make sense to them. And that's really when we're always focusing on this past, present, and future. So I wanted to take a very short moment of your time before bringing you Duncan Slater and just get us to focus on where we find motivation from within. And some of that motivation from within comes from the voices in our head. When I began to think about the voices in my head, I began to overlay the voices that I speak to myself with an entire culture in an organization. So when I talk about big minds, what I mean by a big mind is two things. One, your mind and the way in which you talk to yourself. Or the big mind can also be your entire team. Because an entire team of people, a company, a culture, a unit, is basically functioning like one mind. All of those voices are coming together to impact on the way in which we embrace change. And that's really why I began to call it the big minds, because I always see it in two ways. One, we all have somebody at some point in a team who is just negative. Does anybody know anybody who's negative? Oh, always moaning about something. And then we always have that other person who's very positive. But what's happening is when you begin to look at a culture and an organization of people, they are all beginning to have a voice, because that is the first stage of employee engagement. The first stage of employee engagement is giving people a voice, allowing them sometimes just to vent, get things off their chest. As the same thing is when we sometimes just go home after a busy day and have a rant. You ever had a real rant? I had one the other day, not with too much sleep after my jet lag kicked in. Everything was making me a little bit irritable. And when I get irritable, I lose perspective. And as we lose perspective, sometimes we just rant. And I think that's okay sometimes. Because I know after a little bit of a rant, I wake up the next day and I begin to find perspective. But that's because I didn't speak without a voice. I was actually listening to my voice while it was ranting. Because the voices in your head are telling you how you're going to behave in the future, how you're going to think in the future. They're just a collection of all of our past experiences being flooded into the now, and in that now creates that moment when it has to create the next stage of change. So that's what I wanted you to think about as I go through these little voices for you. They are the voices that could be in your head or the voices that surround you and actually impact on the way you embrace change. So in order to make things simple, because for me personally, I need to keep things simple. I believe that too many consultants come with pie charts and lots of graphs and big words that a Canadian boy like me will never ever understand or definitely spell. And really, it's about trying to keep things simple, because we don't need to complicate the voices in our head when we're talking about finding motivation from within. Because if the voice is too complicated, I'll never understand it. So what I began to do was just simply map out what I was hearing my voices say and do, but then also listening over these last few months to some of the voices in the culture that we were engaging in America. And I began to hear some of these same voices have influence on the way the unit was changing. So I call the first voice my achiever voice. Now, the achiever voice for me is the ultimate voice. It's the voice that sits at the end of the journey when I'm actually going to do something about it. So I want to achieve success. Now, all the other voices I'm going to run you through, and I'm going to take you through very quick 5 voices, but all these other voices will have a dark side and a bright side. The dark side, as I call them, are the voices that stop me from being motivated, stop me from embracing change. The bright side voices are those that actually encourage me. But the really nasty trick the brain plays on me is I need all of them to be speaking bright side in order to achieve success. So I need the next 5 voices to be speaking positively, because it's only going to take one of them to take me out of the game. And I'll give up. And that's why change is so hard for many people. Hard for me personally, hard for you personally. Some of us embrace it easier than others. But when you're moving a culture, remember, all of these voices sit within your business. And as we are moving, we need them all to be bright. Because the first voice is my spotter voice. I call it my spotter voice because it stays focused on the problem. Now, when it's positive for me and it's focused on the problem, it's great. It focuses on the challenge and remains strong. So it's the difference between focusing on the problem in a negative way or a positive way. Because if anybody has ever been a victim or knows somebody as part of a challenge, and it's always poor me, you don't understand what I've had, why I can't do it, because it's about seeing the bright side or the dark side of the challenge. The true focus on the challenge creates determination. When we actually see something that actually isn't exactly the way I want it, we can actually say to ourselves, oh, poor me, this always happens. When I hear people saying that, they've already given up. Because if it always happens that way, and that's what you're focusing on the past, then you've already predetermined your future. I remember once I almost got, well, I got verbally abused in Iceland, not the country, the shop, yes. Great 2-for-1 deals, by the way. But because I speak in my head all the time, I am a little mad. I sometimes forget that this and this are connected. And I remember this lady struggling with her wallet. This would be years ago, and she was struggling away with her wallet. She's like, oh, I can never get my credit card out of this wallet. This always happens. And I simply did say, get a different wallet. Just move on. But the way she was focusing on that was, if it always happens that way, then unless you're going to change it, you pretty much guessed it's always going to happen that way. And that's what I call my spotter. It focuses on the challenge, but it has the opportunity to focus on it in 2 ways. One, see it as an opportunity to change. Or one, the other way, which is my destiny exists in the challenge the way it is now. Because it always happens that way, then what you'll always get is what always happens. The next voice I started listening to is my timekeeper voice. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I'm personally probably the world's best procrastinator. And I can see Sean in the back row going, yes. Sean knows how to manage me by simply saying, everybody stay away from Dale's desk. He's got 30 minutes to get this to me, and that's it. And we were talking about it earlier, she will make me a good wife one day. Because she knows how to manage me. And she sometimes knows exactly my area of management. Because I sometimes live in this creative world that, oh, it's always going to happen. But yes, sometimes the procrastinator, play now, work later. There's always enough time to do it. But what I began to realize, and this has only been because of the very hectic schedule that we've been working on, and Sean's very kind words to me, not always sounding so kind, but by about the work now and play later. And really beginning to change the way I see the world, because by changing my perspective, I always am focused on the play, but it's the reward of the play. And therefore, by actually changing the bright side and saying, look, if I get this done now, I'm going to have lots of time to practice, lots of time to take the stress off me, as opposed to what my natural instinctive behavior is, play now, work later. But we need to begin to start change by understanding that it's going to always take an upfront investment. And I think that lack of upfront investment that we put in either ourselves personally or our team or our programs it makes the rush at the end, and then we make bad choices because we are now into the speed round of getting everything done. And as much as I used to truly believe that I work better under pressure, has anybody ever convinced themselves of that? The night before the exam, I work better under pressure. Don't worry about it. I can write the essay the day before, the report the day before, because I work better under pressure. What a lie. That is when, if you're not listening to your brain and actually controlling it, your brain is lying to you. Nobody works better under pressure. We might convince ourselves of that because that's the way we're working, or that's the way we're approaching life, but everybody always works better when they have time to refocus at the end and add that extra bit of magic. Because the magic only happens when you have enough time at the end to look back on the journey that you've created. The next voice that I began to look at, I call it my evaluator voice. And this is one that when I look at the dark side of the evaluator voice, I often see in a lot of organizations, lots of people running around looking busy, having meetings about meetings, never actually doing anything, but always having a very full diary of, I've got to get everybody else's perspective, but never making a final decision to do anything. And I find that within our organizations, we can spend a lot of time in meetings, or I can actually spend a lot of time meeting myself, but never activating anything. Because we can get caught in this circular motion of always running around trying to make sure everybody's happy. Reality is, not everybody is always going to be happy. And you're not going to be happy with every decision you make in life. Life isn't called utopia. It's about challenge and risk. And so sometimes the bright side only needs to go out and seek enough perspective to gain perspective. It's not to get the answer to the question, because the answer to the question will only ever be answered in the future, which nobody knows that answer. And I think it's finding that right balance between gaining perspective and using it as a crutch, an excuse to move on. Because it's very easy to be always in a meeting finding out what the great answer is, but if you're always in the meeting room, you're not living life. And it's about risk. And sometimes we just have to take the risk in change and then see what happens. You get it right, you get it right. You get it wrong, you get one more chance to get it right by actually knowing that way not to do it again. So think about that with change in our organization and change with yourself. All change comes with elements of risk. The next one is my planner. And the planner is really about goal setting for me. Because the dark side is this unrealistic goals that I set for myself. And I always set myself up for failure. Because when I'm setting unrealistic goals, I'm thinking about my ultimate dream as opposed to my realistic dream. You know, I'm always looking at my goal weight. And I don't look this way when I look in a mirror, because I look much younger and thinner. But when we're focused on the goal weight, we actually aren't focused on the journey to get to the goal weight. And what happens is, very early on, we fail. I had a very interesting conversation with somebody who worked at a gym once, and they were tracking people's membership throughout their time of stopping going. And a lot of it happens at 3 weeks. Everybody goes and they're going to the gym full on, and in the first week they lose lots of weight and they're ready to go, and the next one, and then they start plateauing and they give up. And it's about 3.5 weeks that people begin in gyms to stop using their membership regularly. Because the motivation was, I lost 10 pounds in the first week, I'm going to lose 10 the next week. At some point, it has to plateau. And when we begin to set realistic expectations in our plan, really begin to focus on the journey and not only the outcome, because the outcome only is a route of the journey, and really begin to think about the plan. And when I look at that with an organizational change, and that's where so many companies, I think, are getting it wrong, because they're focused on training. As an answer, I could put people in a 2-day training course, and then all of a sudden we're going to be engaged. No, engagement takes time, because it's a journey into the culture of an organization. And the last voice I wanted to introduce you to is my expert voice. It's a little bit arrogant sometimes, my expert voice, that I know best. But that's where my other voice that gains perspectives from others is useful. Because that's where I think sometimes when we use our expertise, we can either use it as an opportunity for failure. I hear people say, oh, we tried that, it doesn't work. Have you ever heard that? I hear that so often, as opposed to say, we've got 5 minutes, let's make it happen. As opposed to, well, last time we had 5 minutes, it didn't work. But this time, you're that much wiser than you were last time. And that's the focus that we have to have on organizational change and change in ourselves. Because to find motivation from within myself, I am only comprised of all of the experience I ever had. If I focus on the reasons why I failed, then I'm going to focus on opportunities of why not to do anything about it. So begin to listen to that voice, because I hear it all around me all the time. We tried that and it didn't work. Who here has heard that before? Who here, now keep your hands up if you've said it to yourself. So that's what I call my expert voice. Listen to your expert voice, but challenge it. Because if it didn't work last time, that means you're that much wiser. It didn't work last time in the past, but now I'm focused on the Zen now. And the Zen now allows me to focus differently because it's experience. So going forward, either you can do this for yourself as part of finding motivation from within. You can do this with your teams, or look at it as total engagement of an organization. But the now facts. Let's just face facts. What's not working? What do I want to change? How am I feeling currently? I might have found myself on a crossroad and a period in my life where it's not where I thought I was going to be. So write down the facts. Going on and on about them leaves you the victim voice going on again. Facts are facts. And in the now, I can only deal with facts. And then look at the future perspective. The past allows me to put my fact list together. And then what do I want to be? What do I want to be like? What do I want my future to be like? And as I begin to focus on the future, where I need to be, then I can ask myself the third and most magical question: what am I going to do about it? And then I begin to focus on what can we do to make change in either ourselves or our organization. Because those three simple questions is, where am I now? Where do I want to be? And what am I going to do to make that happen? So I wanted to open up our minds to change, whether we are looking at it from an employee engagement perspective, a personal perspective. But as I now pass you over to Duncan, Duncan fascinated me when I first, I was introduced to you over the telephone first, but now, and then meeting you, to reach one of those periods in your life where you have to make choices. And now, I'm not going to go too far into Duncan's story because I want him to enlighten you with some of his journey, but what brings him here today, I find fascinating. Fascinating because there was many opportunities for any one of those dark voices to not put you where you are today. Now, Duncan is a Guinness Book of World Record holders by going to the South Pole and skiing to the South Pole. I couldn't imagine skiing, actually, because I tried it once, and that's a really bad Canadian thing to say, but it didn't work for me. too scary. But he's accomplished so much by finding himself in a period of being in the now. And in the now, we have that choice that I talked about. We can only wish for the past to rejoin us and make it all go away. Or we can focus on the future. So now I'd like us to put our hands together. I'd like to introduce you to Duncan Slater, who is going to be our guest speaker this evening, and he's going to tell you his story on finding motivation from within. Thank you.